Hello. In this video, I was going to diverge from the lockpicking to cover another subject I've been looking at a little bit lately. We've been setting up a terrarium for my stepdaughter's bearded dragon, and so I was looking at setting up the lighting and looking into that a little bit more. And while I was looking at it, I was looking at what other people did as far as safety goes, and I saw a little bit of misinformation out there. So I figured I would just sort of share a little bit of information for what you can do as far as electrical safety with your terrarium or your aquarium. Not trying to fearmonger, you can take it or leave it, but I just figured I'd give you a little bit of information on that. So this will apply to both terrariums and aquariums. And so I just want to give you a sort of a quick introduction. So this is a simplified view of what the electrical system looks like in your house if you live in the US. And I should do a disclaimer real quick. This is for the United States. I don't know enough about how the electrical system is set up in other countries. But in the United States, there's generally going to be a transformer outside your house that's supplying your house with 120 volts AC. That power is going to go into a circuit breaker panel. And there's actually going to be a bunch of circuit breakers in there. There's not just going to be one, there's probably going to be 20 of different size circuit breakers. And there'll probably be a 15 or 20 amp one going to the various rooms in your house. And these are all determined by different building codes. And so there'll be a circuit breaker, there'll be a hot line that goes to the outlets throughout your house, and then a neutral line that lets that power go back to the transformer. There's also going to be a ground rod that takes a ground wire to the electrical outlets. And so that's going to be pretty much the same throughout your whole house right there, with the circuit breakers slightly different sizes. From in these outlets, you can plug in your devices, whether that's lamps, extension cords, other things like that. The purpose of this circuit breaker is so that if there was a short somewhere along this line, if this line were to break and touch the house or something like that, that all that electricity would try to rush through this wire if there was a short. And the purpose of this circuit breaker is to pop and shut off electricity going down this line when more than 20 amps goes through it. The purpose of this is not so much to save anybody's life or protect people, but to prevent fires. This is really to keep the house from catching fire once the current starts rushing through and things can heat up and melt. This ground wire, however, is for safety. This is, if you see, let me see if I can show you one real quick. If you ever notice the bottom hole on an outlet, this one right here, that's going to be the ground wire. The purpose of this is if there is a short past the outlet, this ground wire, if your appliances connect to it, allow the current to flow through the ground wire. So let me use some colors real quick to sort of show you. So we've got power coming in through here, goes up, goes down here, goes to your light, comes back along the neutral line, then goes back to the transformer. So that's the normal flow of it. So let's say, however, there is a little short on the light and it touches the terrarium. Then we're going to have some electricity start to flow through the aquarium down to the ground. And also, if anyone's touching it, it's going to flow through them down to the ground like that. So it's not going to be very pleasant. If there is a ground wire connected to that device, the electricity can also go through that ground wire. And that's the purpose of it, to provide a short circuit path to ground that's very low resistance, and it diverts a lot of the electricity there so it doesn't go through your body. So a human's body, the resistance varies, but like on the low end, it's going to be a few thousand ohms, whereas your ground wire is going to be pure copper, and that's going to be a few milliohms. And so that's going to, essentially, the current's going to take the path of the least resistance. The majority of it's going to flow through here, and it is less likely to hurt you as it goes through the ground wire. You still get this rush of current going through it, and it still trips the 20 amp breaker. So that's pretty much going to be the same. That setup will exist for all of your rooms. But one of the issues I saw when I was buying stuff for the terrarium is that almost none of the equipment actually uses a grounding wire when you buy it. And I assume they just do that to keep it cheaper and make it a little bit more, affordable for people. But like this right here, this fluorescent lighting has a high voltage transformer in it, so it's going to have pretty good voltage in it as well. It's going to give you a pretty good shock. No ground wires on it. So what that means is that we don't have that normal protection, and if there is a short, we don't get this ground wire advantage. It's everything that's going through the terrarium and through us. So it's going to be lots of sparks, and we're going to trip that 20 amps before that goes off. So it's going to be a lot of energy. So what can we do to reduce that and make it a little bit safer? Probably the easiest thing to do is to buy one of these GFCI outlets right here. So this is, if you're in the United States, these are required for bathrooms and for kitchens within a certain distance of the sink or any sort of water source. And that's because water and electricity is extremely dangerous. Water can make low voltages very, very dangerous. So they have GFCI outlets. These are called ground fault circuit interrupter outlets. And what they do is these actually monitor the electricity going through it, going from this hot line, and it's watching it come back to the neutral line. And if it doesn't see that electricity coming back, it shuts off the power. And these do it at a much smaller range. So whereas a circuit breaker trips at about 20 amps, this is going to trip right here at about 5 milliamps. So that's about 4,000 times less current going through your body or through your terrarium. So it is much, much safer. And it's much less likely that you'll have an injury if you have something like this installed. There are a few things you need to be aware of if you buy one of these. You do want to, most likely, you want to purchase one that auto resets. This way, if the power goes out at your house, and you need to maintain a certain amount of lighting or a water pump running for your terrarium or aquarium, when the power comes back on, the auto reset ones will automatically turn on, whereas a manual reset one, if the power goes out, you'll have to manually press a button to reset it. So you probably want to buy an auto reset one. And this is not so much an issue nowadays. However, if you have some very heavy equipment that you're using with it, some very large motors, if you're trying to charge some large batteries or do some sort of backup power supply, anything like that where you've got really high inductive or capacitive loads, they can occasionally, in the past, there are some cases where they'll cause this to trip. It's very unlikely unless you have a very large motor. One of the easiest ways to check it is try turning on the motor with this thing plugged in and see if it trips this. But for the vast majority of you, that's not going to be an issue. And also, for the vast majority of you, if your motor is tripping this, if you're using like a small motor for your aquarium, it's probably more likely your motor actually has a fault than it's actually causing that trip due to the like an inductive load. So you do want to make sure that your appliance is new and that your wiring isn't worn out and things like that. So I highly recommend these. They're really cheap. You can buy them on Amazon. Auto reset. Useful little device. Yep. Next thing I wanted to talk about was ground probes. So here is an example of a ground probe that I actually use this when I'm working on electronics. But this plugs into the outlet right here, the ground line, and then I can connect this to my ESD wrist strap when I'm working on stuff like that. But what this does is this lets you you can attach this ground probe. You can attach one of these to your terrarium or your aquarium. If you have one with a metal frame, like a terrarium with a metal frame, attaching it to the metal frame with like a screw and a washer is probably how you want to go. If there's any screws that are used to hold the frame together, you can just snip this wire, strip it a little bit, wrap it around that screw, screw it in there, and then plug it into your ground on your outlet. They also make some of these pre-made for aquariums. that are meant to be submerged in water that you can use if you're using an aquarium. And what the ground probe is going to do is when you don't have this ground line, like I never seem to see on a lot of this aquarium and terrarium equipment, it's going to provide it. So it provides that neutral line right there that's going to allow current to flow through here. So it provides a path for current to flow from here to the ground. I've heard some people say that, well, you don't need a ground probe, because what a ground probe does is if you have a charge on your aquarium, it's going to allow that charge to flow to the ground, and then you have a current, and that can mess with your fish, or it can cause issues that wouldn't be there if you didn't have the wire. I'm going to generally disagree with that statement. The thing is that yes, if you don't have the ground wire, if you don't have a ground probe, you don't have the current flow necessarily, but you are building up a charge on here. And there's no real reason you should be building up a charge on your aquarium or your terrarium. And yes, technically you can build a charge by movement or by some sort of electromagnetic radiation, but that's probably not why you have a current or a charge. The reason you probably have a charge is due to some sort of fault with your appliances. That is significantly more likely to provide a noticeable voltage than your radiation from your lighting. It's much more likely that you have a faulty appliance that is building up a charge in there. So if you have a ground wire, it does allow that current to flow to the ground. The alternative is that current will try to flow through other paths to ground. And that can be your animals, or it could be you if you touch it. So in my opinion, it is better to have the ground wire and allow that current to flow there, and even potentially trip some of these other breakers, whether it's the 20 amp breaker or the GFCI. It's better to let that happen than to have a charge building up on here waiting to surprise you when you touch it. I would rather go to there and trip some sort of issue. The other thing too is you really shouldn't have a charge building up here, and that's a sign that there's something wrong with one of the appliances. So if you're seeing a charge there, I would definitely check your appliances and try to identify, when I plug this in, why do I suddenly have a voltage on my terrarium or aquarium? And see, well, does that always happen? Or is it because it's 6 years old and something was chewing on a wire? But generally, you don't really want a voltage here. There may be some millivolts, that's okay, that's noise. But really, you shouldn't see any large voltage in the volts range building up right there. So that's why I would say I recommend the ground probe, because it's safety-wise, it is going to be a significant benefit. Between the two of these, I mean, you're reducing the amount of current that's going to go through you or an animal many, many, many thousands of times. I mean, honestly, between the two of them, it's not unrealistic to say you could reduce the current flow by 10,000, which is a massive improvement as far as safety goes for you or the little critter. So that's why I would generally recommend them. Not to fearmonger though. These are unusual circumstances that would cause all these things to trip. So not trying to terrify anybody about it. Just wanted to share that sort of opinions, I guess, or my perspective on it. Last thing I want to cover is daisy chains. That's something else I've heard people say, that daisy chains don't matter, that you can daisy chain things, and that you only didn't need to daisy chain things in the past. That's not exactly true. Daisy chaining is an issue when you start taking, you have one cord, we'll say this one cord is rated for 5 amps, and then you have two other cords, we'll say that they're rated for, I don't know, something more, 10 amps. And then let's say that this is all connected to a circuit that's providing 20 amps. Okay, and let's say this is at your wall outlet. So your house is fine, the circuit breaker doesn't trip, providing 20 amps of current. And you've got a bunch of devices on here. You've got your TV and your, I don't know, some music coming here. So, and you're pulling 20 amps here. So this cable is fine, this cable is fine. However, this one, because it's only rated for 5 amps, can heat up and it can catch fire and burn. So if all of your extension cords are rated for more than your circuit breakers, then your circuit breaker will trip before they catch fire. That's true. but not all of them are going to be. And I don't know. You have to make sure that that's true, and you also have to make sure that oftentimes that these have multiple outlets. That the problem is other people start plugging things in without knowing the full picture, and they can start overloading things too. So even though you figured out, okay, this is rated for 20 amps and I have this set up, someone else can start plugging in things down the line to 10 amps here, and they unplug this. They can create situations down the line that can still create a fire if you have other people plugging things in. So that's the real issue with daisy chaining. If you can control that and you know nobody else is going to keep extending things and you know what your cables are rated for, then yes, there are occasions where you can do daisy chaining safely. But if you don't know what those cables are rated for, or you don't understand what I just said, then you probably shouldn't be daisy chaining. And if you also can't control who has access to those outlets and prevent other people from doing it, then I would recommend you don't do it as a general rule. And yeah, that's my, I hope that wasn't too long. That's my quick thoughts on electrical safety with terrariums and aquariums. If you have any questions, comments, if I misspoke and misled, if I said anything wrong, please correct me or let me know down in the comments below. And thank you for watching.